Good morning, everybody. Happy Sabbath. Let's start with prayer. Dear God, thank you for this beautiful Sabbath day, Lord. Thank you for just loving us and having us all come together to praise your name. Thank you for all that you do. Amen. Theodore Roosevelt said, "Believe you can, and you're halfway there." In a small village, there lived a boy named Leo. He was a small, skinny kid, and he lived forever in fear. Some older, bigger boys from a nearby village would harass poor Leo, bullying him and having fun at his expense. One day, a wise old man was passing by the village and saw little Leo being picked on. When the other boys left, the wise man went over to Leo and gave him a beautiful lion's tail, along with a small tie that allowed Leo to hang the tail from his belt. "It's a magic tail," said the old man. "When the person wearing it acts bravely, he or she will turn into a ferocious lion." Now, this wise man had quite the reputation in the surrounding villages and had done many good things. So Leo didn't doubt his words. From that day on, he wore the lion's tail hanging from his belt, waiting for the day that those horrible kids would turn up so that he could teach them a good lesson. But the day the boys finally did come along, Leo got scared and tried to run away. However, they caught up to him and surrounded him. The usual jokes, taunting, and pushing started in, and he had nowhere to hide. All of a sudden, Leo felt that lion's tail hanging from his belt. He remembered what the wise man had told him. Then, summoning up all his courage, Leo tensed his body, made two fists, and looked up. He looked into the eyes of each and every boy. With all the calmness and ferocity in the world, he promised that if they didn't leave him alone at that instant, at least one of them would regret it forever. Today, tomorrow, and every other day. He kept looking them in the eyes with this intensity and his bravest expression, ready to do what he had promised. All of a sudden, Leo felt goosebumps all over. This must be the sign that he was turning into a lion, because the looks on the boys' faces were definitely changing. They all took a step back, looked at each other, and finally ran off. Leo wanted to take off after them and give them a good beating with his new body. But when he tried to move, his legs felt short and normal, so he had to abandon the ideal and stay put. Not far off, the wise man observed, smiling. He strolled on over to Leo. Leo was ecstatic, though a wee bit disappointed that his new lion body had only lasted a short time, and that he hadn't managed to fight them. "You wouldn't have been able to anyway," the wise man gently said. "No one fights with lions, because simply seeing them and knowing how brave and ferocious they are, everyone runs away. How often do you see someone fighting a lion?" It was true. Leo couldn't remember ever seeing anyone fight a lion. He suddenly became filled with thought, looking at that lion's tail. At that moment, he understood everything. There had been no magic, no lion transformation. What had happened was that a wise old man had showed him that bullies and other cowardly animals never confront a truly courageous boy. In the beginning, Leo was scared. He didn't have the courage to stand up for himself. But by the end, he had developed this courage he didn't even know was in him. And that's what I want to talk about today. Having courage even in the toughest, most seemingly impossible situations. The dictionary defines courage as the ability to do something that frightens one. Today's story is about someone who had the courage to do something that was scary, yet also stood for what he believed in. About someone who had the courage to stand out from everyone else. For today's story, we will be traveling to the book of Daniel, chapter 6. King Darius was the current king of Babylon. One day, the king decided it was a good idea to have some smart men help him rule over his kingdom. He chose 120 governors for this job. He also chose 3 men to be supervisors. Daniel was one of the supervisors. The king appointed these men so that he would not be cheated. Daniel was a fabulous worker. He worked so hard that he outshone all the other supervisors and governors. Because of his hard work ethic and his amazing results, King Darius planned to put Daniel in charge of the whole kingdom. As you can imagine, this made all the other important men quite jealous. They tried to find something wrong with Daniel, anything to prove that he wasn't as great as the king thought he was. But they could not find one single thing wrong with this man. He was a hard worker who did his job correctly. He was trustworthy. He wasn't lazy, and he never cheated the king, not once. This made the men even angrier. How was this man so good? They finally said, "We are never going to find any reason to accuse Daniel. He is far too good of a man. But we must get him out. We got to find a way. And it's going to have to be something about the law of his God." One day, they decided, yes, they had it. They had finally they came up with the perfect plan, a way to finally get Daniel out of the picture. So they all went to King Darius as a rather large group. "King Darius, live forever. All of us guys that work for you, the supervisors, governors, assistant governors, advisors, and captains of the soldiers, we have all agreed on something, dear king. We think that you should make a new law that everyone will have to obey. For the next 30 days, no one should pray to any god or any man except you, our great king. Anyone who doesn't follow this law should be thrown into the lion's den. So come on, our king, make the law. Write it down so it cannot be changed. The law of the Medes and the Persians cannot be canceled." They knew what they were doing here. They knew that there was no way Daniel was ever going to follow this law. He was a very godly man. This was finally their chance to get rid of him. Of course, the new law sounded good to the king. Why not? People only praying and worshiping him, the king? He had no clue what they were up to. He just liked the sound of it. So King Darius made it a new law and had it written up. And once the law was put in place, it could not be undone. Daniel had a habit he did every day. He had a room upstairs in his house. The windows opened up toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, every single day, he would go upstairs to this room, open the windows, and pray to his God every day, no matter what. Rain, sunshine, good weather, bad weather, it didn't matter. He faithfully worshiped his God. So when he heard about this new law the king had made, he went right home, up to that room, windows open, got down on his knees, and he prayed. He prayed and thanked God, just like he did every single day. Now think about it. He knew there was this law. He knew what would happen to him if he got caught. He could have rationalized it over with God. Okay, God, we both know where my heart is and how much I love you. But Lord, I don't want to die. I don't want to be eaten up by lions. So I'm going to worship you in the downstairs room for a while. You know, the room without any windows. Just until this all cools down. But you know where my heart truly is, God. You know how much I love you. This is just temporary. Daniel could have thought like that. He knew the consequences. He knew what was going to happen if he kept up his daily routine. He could have tried to find a way around it just for a month until this all passed. But he didn't. He didn't let that law stop him. He knew what was right, and he kept true to his beliefs and true to his God. He prayed just like he normally did. He courageously prayed in front of those open windows, just like always. Now remember, that huge group of men that despised Daniel, that want to take him down, they knew where Daniel lived. And they knew what time he prayed every day. So they followed him to his house, stood beneath that upstairs window, and sure enough, caught him praying and worshiping his beloved God, just like they knew he would. They were ecstatic. Just imagine, finally, they got him. They had finally found a way to get rid of their arch nemesis. They ran back to the palace, bursting to tell the king their news. "King Darius, didn't you make a law that said no one may pray to any god or any man except you, our king? And doesn't that law state that anyone who disobeys it for the next 30 days will be thrown into the lion's den? King Darius had no clue what they were up to. He had no clue what they had up their sleeves, but he had made that law. So he answered, yes, I wrote that law, and the law of the Medes and the Persians cannot be canceled. What they said next shook the king. He was not expecting it. They told him that his beloved Daniel, the one he trusted the most, the one he was grooming to take over his kingdom, was not following the law he had written. That Daniel still prayed to his God every day, 3 times a day. That Daniel had went against what the king had ordered. When they finished speaking, the king was devastated. He adored Daniel. He decided he had to find a way to save him. He could not let him be eaten alive by those animals. He worked until sunset, desperately trying to save him. But sure enough, that group came to him yet again. They were not going to let this go. They had worked very hard to get rid of his favorite person, and they had finally found a way. They were going to make sure that the king held up to his new rule. They said, remember our precious king, the law of the Medes and the Persians. It says that no law or command given by the king can be changed. The king was stuck. He couldn't do anything to save him. He had to respect his own laws. So King Darius gave the order. His officers brought Daniel to the lion's den. Just before he was thrown in, the king said to him, may the God you serve all the time save you. And into the den Daniel went. Then a big stone was brought and rolled over the opening of the lion's den. The king used his special ring to put his seal on the rock, showing that no one could move it. No one could rescue poor Daniel from his fate with the lions. Then the king went back to his palace. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't enjoy anything that night. He tossed and turned, hoping that somehow, some way, Daniel survives his night in the den. Now remember, Daniel is in a den full of lions, big bad lions. I'm quite sure they're pretty hungry. They might have even been starved all day so that they would be extra hungry that night when their special guest arrived. And lions are fierce creatures. They eat people. They can rip someone apart with hardly any effort. They have very strong teeth, and they roar a lot. And when they're hungry, they might roar extra loudly. If a person suddenly appears in their territory, they might even roar with delight, because they know they're about to get a tasty little treat. So the next morning, after a restless, sleepless night, the king got up at dawn. He rushed to the lion's den, hoping that somehow a miracle had happened. He was so worried the closer he got to the den. He called out to Daniel, hoping he was still alive. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your beloved God that you worship every day been able to save you from the lions? I could just imagine the king nervously twitching his fingers, clutching at his robes, hoping that Daniel was going to answer him. And to his shocked delight, he did answer him. Verse 21 says that Daniel answered back, my king live forever. My God sent his angel to close the lions' mouths. They have not hurt me, because my God knows that I am innocent. My king, I never did anything wrong to you. King Darius was thrilled. He was elated that his favorite supervisor had survived this crazy ordeal. He had his servants lift him out of the den. They checked for injuries, shocked when they found not a one. There was not a scratch on this man. His robes were not touched. No little rip or tear like an animal trying to get a little taste. Nothing. Daniel did not have one single injury on him. And remember, Daniel told the king that the angel closed the lions' mouths, which means they probably couldn't even growl at him. They just sat there all night long, looking at what they thought was going to be their delicious dinner. Not a hair on Daniel's head had been touched. Now the king had a new command. He had all the men, the ones who had Daniel accused and thrown into the den, brought to him. He even had their wives and kids gathered up. All those people were brought to the lion's den, and they were thrown into it. Now, do you think they got as lucky as Daniel did? I mean, just hours earlier, the lion's mouth had been shut. They hadn't messed with Daniel. Maybe they'd get as lucky? Not so much. Verse 24 says that the lions grabbed them before they even hit the floor of the den. And the lions in the way of his worship. He remained faithful even when the consequences meant death. He was brave enough to stand for what he believed in. These other men, they didn't have God in their life, and they were evil. They purposely had Daniel thrown in there to be killed. So unfortunately for them, there was no angel in there to close the lion's mouth again. No miracle happened for them, and they were all grabbed before they hit the floor. Then King Darius wrote a letter. It was to all people and nations, those who spoke every language in the world. This letter informed them of the new law put in place. The new law was that everyone fear and respect the God of Daniel, that his God was the living God, that his kingdom would never be destroyed and his rule would never end, and that it was God who had saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel succeeded during King Darius' reign. He survived what seemed like the impossible. He stuck to what he believed in, and nothing else mattered to him. And that is the story of Daniel and the lions. I have always looked at this story from a faith point of view. Clearly, this was a very faithful man who loved his Lord. But there is also a courage here. Courage to stand up for what he believed in. Courage to be different than everyone else. Courage to go against the crowd so that he could keep his beliefs intact. To me, the faith and courage here are intertwined. Because when you have that kind of faith in God, when you believe in him so strongly, when you have this fierce love for him, it produces courage. Your faith can produce bravery, strength, and courage that you didn't even know was possible. I'm going to tell another story right now about someone who wasn't so brave. I know that I told a story about one of my neighbors before. Well, I have another one today about a different neighbor. I have lived in my house for almost 13 years now and have had several neighbors. Some of them fantastic, some of them not so much. And I have a really bad tendency to not learn people's names, so I make up nicknames instead. Today's story is about the crazy lady across the street. Not the nicest or most creative nickname, but it felt right at the time. She was an older woman that lived across the street from me. This woman was different. She would just do these random, annoying things. She liked to sit on her porch with a broom and just hit the roof of the porch over and over. Bam, 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 bam. Every single day. Bam, bam, bam. And you can hear everything from inside my house. So I would hear this all the time. She would also sit in her car and just hit the gas while the car was in park. Just rev it up for no reason, no matter what time it was. She also had this wonderful habit of walking right into your house. If your door was unlocked, she would come on in. She did this to us more than once and demanded my then husband to help her with whatever it was she wanted. We learned to stop locking our doors. But the biggest thing about her was her parking space in front of her house. Oh my Lanta, that space was like gold to her. She didn't have a driveway like I do. She just had a paved space in front of the sidewalk. She would be out there every day, sweeping it for hours. She was obsessed with keeping it clean. And you were not allowed to walk on it, even though it's right off the sidewalk. If you did walk on it, or goodness forbid, linger for a moment, she would chase you off with a broom. She would run at you, swinging a broom, yelling something in German. I always avoided that side of the street. And she loved calling the cops. If you walked over there and she didn't like it, which she usually didn't, she would call the police on you. One time, some neighbor kids were playing in the road, outlining themselves in chalk. Totally innocent kid stuff. She called the cops on them. The police knew her address by heart. Needless to say, she was not very popular on our street. She had quite the reputation. People started to see how she was. And some people liked to get a reaction from her. There were some teen boys that lived a street behind me. These boys were a bit rough. They had a reputation of their own. They liked to do things to her just to get her riled up. They would wait until she was sweeping her precious parking space and then walk over there. And then double over in laughter when she started chasing them with that broom. They would yell profanities at her. And they loved throwing stuff in her yard, because they knew that drove her crazy. One particular day, many of us neighbors were outside, doing yard work or just relaxing. I had my young stepdaughter outside with me. And here come those three boys, sauntering down the road. Of course, the old woman was outside, sitting on her porch, like always. They just started messing with her. They kept throwing leaves on her parking space. They were throwing garbage and stuff in her yard, laughing at her. They were basically mentally torturing her. She kept trying to get them to stop, but they were on a roll. They just kept at her, taunting her the whole time. Thing is, many of us neighbors were outside. We all saw this going on. At first I laughed a bit, because I thought they were just being silly teenagers. Then I realized how mean they were being, and she was getting pretty emotional. So you know what I did to help her? Nothing. Not a single thing. I just sat there and watched, with my stepdaughter next to me. I didn't want to help her because I didn't want the boys to do anything to my property. But the biggest thing was, I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to help her because she was the enemy of the street. I knew what they were doing was wrong. And I knew that my stepdaughter was watching, waiting to see how I was going to react. Kids notice everything. But I just sat there, allowing this poor woman to be humiliated. It went on for a while, no one helping her, until they finally bored of it and left. The whole time, we all just sat there, doing absolutely nothing. I felt really bad inside. I kind of wanted to help, even though the woman drove me nuts. But I did not want to be the only one. I did not want to be the one person who aligned herself with the crazy lady. Later on that night, I glanced outside and saw her sweeping her parking space in the dark. I still felt really bad for doing nothing, so I crossed the street to see if she needed help. But of course, I glanced around first, to make sure no one else was out there, so no one would see me talking to her. I asked if she wanted me to help sweep. And this woman turned to me with tears in her eyes, looking so sad, and said, "I don't know why they do this to me." At that moment, I felt like such a horrible person. At that moment, I saw past all her annoying habits, and I just saw a human being. A poor old woman who had been treated badly while we all just sat and watched. She wouldn't let me help, but we talked for a few minutes, and then I went back home. I would love to say that after that day, I was brave and stood up for her. That she never went through that kind of stuff again. But unfortunately, I can't, because I still don't want to stick out amongst my other neighbors. I still don't want to call attention to myself. She died several years ago, and I can never make it right. I can't go back in time and stand up for what I know is right. It kind of haunts me now, how I just sat there so many different times, how I did nothing. It's pathetic. It's not always easy doing the right thing, standing up for what you believe in. But it is always what God wants you to do, no matter the difficulty. I feel like this Muhammad Ali quote kind of works with my story. He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. What did I accomplish that day? Was I a good role model? Did I stand up for a poor woman who was all alone? Did I stand up for what I knew was right? Fortunately, I did none of that. I was weak. Weak and unwilling to go against the crowd. I did not display courage back then. courage like Daniel. I'm going to read some Bible verses that I wish I had read back then. Let's see what God says about courage. Joshua 1:9. Remember that I commanded you to be strong and brave, so don't be afraid. The Lord your God will be with you everywhere you go. Psalms 27:1. The Lord is my light and the one who saves me. So why should I fear anyone? The Lord protects my life, so why should I be afraid? And lastly, Isaiah 41:10. So don't worry, because I am with you. Don't be afraid, because I am your God. I will make you strong and will help you. I will support you with my right hand that saves you. These are some powerful verses. God is with us always, even when it feels like we're alone. God gives us the strength, the courage to make it. Sometimes you may not realize it until the trial passes. You may not realize how strong you had to be to get through whatever you just got through. And you may not realize, but that courage comes from God. That strength, that power, it comes from the faith you have in your Lord. Even when you feel weak, even when you feel like you just can't take anymore, God is right there to fill up your tank. Whenever you feel like it's getting hard to stand for what you believe in this crazy, cruel world, when you feel like you're about to give up, when you feel like you no longer can be courageous amongst the lions, turn to him. Give it to him. Trust in him. He will give you the strength. Mark Twain said that courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. Life can be scary. And being faithful and courageous doesn't mean that you're never going to have anything scary in your life. It doesn't mean that you're never going to be afraid. It just means that you have to push past all that. True courage comes from above. So when it feels too real, too scary, pass on over to him. He has got you. Deuteronomy 31:6. Be strong and brave. Don't be afraid of them. Don't be frightened. The Lord your God will go with you. He will not leave or forget you. He doesn't leave us. He doesn't forget us, even when it feels like he does. Live your life in faith. Allow him to fill you up with his courage. Don't be like me, too afraid to stir the pot and cause attention to myself. Too afraid to go against everyone else, even though I knew it was the right thing to do. Be like Daniel, who had the faith in God to trust him enough, even in his darkest times, even in the scariest of times. Be like Daniel, who honored and praised God, even when it meant going before the lions. Today is the perfect day. Let us try and be like Daniel, courageous and faithful till the end, no matter the consequences. I'm going to close today with a quote by Roy T. Bennett. Be brave to stand for what you believe in, even if you stand alone. I wish you all a beautiful and happy Sabbath day. Thank you.